With the Marvel Cinematic Universe about to turn 15 years old, it's more evident than ever that superheroes have fully entrenched themselves in our popular culture. Who do we have to blame for this? Everyone's favorite wall-crawling menace, Spider-Man. The first Tobey Maguire movie back in 2002 would set the template for Marvel as we know it today, with a trilogy that spawned more memes than the internet knows what to do with.
This is something else.
With Andrew Garfield's not-so-amazing duology of films imploding, leaving Tom Holland in the role for the foreseeable future, and the animated Miles Morales movies continuing with a two-parter next year, we've had 4 different Spider-Man film series with 9 movies and counting. Since the film that truly kicked off the superhero craze of the 21st century is turning 20 this year, let's take a look at some things that you may have missed across all of the Spider-Man movies. While Spider-Man has held 2 live-action movie series without any other superheroes in it, one of the things that makes Spidey so interesting is that he's a regular guy in a world that's full of them. Tom Holland's Peter Parker may have entered the MCU about 2 phases later than anyone would have wanted, but it's thanks to the world building that's taken place that has made his character so unique compared to what came before. You get to see a Peter Parker that's grown up surrounded by superheroes, much like the audience that grew up with the MCU. Peters said so himself that he learns about Thor in his physics class, but did you notice that Bruce Banner and Howard Stark are depicted alongside real-world scientists like Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein? Spidey fans will argue forever about who played the best on-screen Peter Parker, but at least we can all agree that J.K. Simmons' J. Jonah Jameson was the best part of the original trilogy, right? Much like all of the side characters in the Sam Raimi trilogy, Jonah's got his own life outside of Peter's, and that's subtly communicated across all 3 movies. You can see with each passing film that his health is getting worse, possibly suffering from diabetes. In the first movie, we can see that he's got a bottle of Tums and Rolaids on his desk to aid his heartburn. In the second movie, he mentions that he's nauseous and that Peter needs to get his portfolio off his desk before he goes into a diabetic coma. The third movie really shows how bad his health's gotten, as we can see that the number of medications he's taking has quadrupled in size. You can tell it's gotten really bad too. Not only does Betty Brant have to remind him about how his wife is concerned about his blood pressure, he actually listens.
Thanks for the good news.
A common complaint about Spider-Man 3 is that it's got way too much going on and introduces too many characters. One of them being everyone's favorite kiss-ass Eddie Brock. Eddie's second scene in Spider-Man 3 is him sucking up to J. Jonah Jameson, trying to land the staff job at the Daily Bugle that we know our boy Peter deserves more. And it's great that Robbie agrees, as he points out that Peter's been with the Bugle for years while Eddie was just hired on a few weeks ago.
That's right, Jonah. Peter's been with us for years. He's done a great job.
This is actually a funky continuity disconnect between the films, as Robbie actually name-dropped Eddie in the first movie, saying Eddie's been on it for weeks and can't get a decent picture. The official novelization of the film corroborates this too, describing the photographer as a young man with a venomous glare, given how Sam Raimi didn't want to use Venom in the movies, preferring to stick to the classic cast created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. It's not surprising this continuity disconnect exists, but hey, this is the least of Spider-Man 3's problems. The Tom Holland movies have been derided by many as being too different from what's come before. Although that was the whole point, but they pay as much respect to their source material as the original trilogy did, even in the most subtle of ways. Far From Home pays homage to several Spidey stories, every scene that does so featuring a car whose license plate references a classic comic. In the scenes featuring the sand and fire elementals, you can see a car with the license plate numbers 463. Each of these refer to the debut issues of the Amazing Spider-Man comic of the respective villain, alongside the year the comic debuted. And the callbacks don't stop there. Nick Fury's car has the license plate MTU 83779, referencing 1979's Marvel Team-Up 83, in which Spidey teams up with Nick Fury. The scene where Peter and MJ finally kiss shows a plate that reads ASM 143, which is the issue of Amazing Spider-Man where Peter and MJ kissed for the first time. Finally, we see a car with the plate of AF1562 at the Newark airport, signifying 1962's Amazing Fantasy issue 15, which is the debut of our favorite wall crawler himself. While it's definitely passé to dunk on Twilight nowadays, it's pretty funny to see the parallels with that and the Andrew Garfield movies. Think about it. The central character romance involves the daughter of a cop who immediately falls in love with a hunky, mysterious, superpowered kid who sneaks into her bedroom and her father disapproves of.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, granted, Gwen's dad was always a cop in the comics, so you could make the argument that Twilight was just ripping off Spider-Man. And considering the Twilight film series ended the year The Amazing Spider-Man came out, it's not hard to see how the dots connect on this one. Although I can't help but ponder an alternate timeline where they went whole hog on the teen romance angle and made Flash Thompson as Venom the Jacob to Peter's Edward with Gwen caught in the middle, huh? As cursed as that might have been, I can't help but laugh at the possibility that we could have had fandom wars over Team Peter and Team Flash before Team Cap and Team Iron Man. Stan Lee's been in more movies than some actual actors. His passing in November of 2018 meant that the number of remaining Stan Lee cameos was limited, so we had to cherish every one that came since. It's only fitting that the ultimate celebration of his most beloved character, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, features over 20 cameos by Stan the Man himself. The big one takes place in Stan's Collectibles, where Miles gets his first Spider-Man suit, attempting to carry on the legacy of his world's Peter Parker. Stan mentions that he'll miss Spidey, and that they were friends, echoing how Spider-Man's a friend to us all. He promises Miles that his suit will fit him eventually, followed by a camera pan to a no refund sign. That's probably the most accurate Stan Lee cameo of all time, as far as the businessman side of him goes.
Enough said.
One of the best things Into the Spider-Verse did for Miles Morales was giving him a creative side that was not present in the original comics. His love of graffiti is what keeps him tight with Uncle Aaron while simultaneously driving a wedge between him and his father. If you pay close attention to his room in Spider-Verse, you can see designs that resemble Superman and Batman above his desk. Given how in this universe Spider-Man seems to be the only superhero anyone talks about, is it possible that Miles could end up inventing the world's finest and consequently DC as a whole? It's more likely that this is a nod to how Miles' co-creator Brian Bendis is a massive fan of DC and even had Peter Parker reference multiple DC heroes during his time on the Ultimate Spider-Man comics, which ultimately gave us Miles Morales. To quote Jackson Pollock, every painter paints who he is. So this is another fine example of life imitating art. The classic 60s Spider-Man theme song is as synonymous to the character as webbing, clones, or dead uncles, and it's made it into every series of Spidey films in one way or another. Sam Raimi fought to get the full theme song into the credits of his first movie, as he wanted to homage the Lee Ditko era of the comics that inspired that show. For some, it was the first time that they'd ever heard the song, and they'd spend far too many hours coming up with as many inappropriate interpretations of it as they could. Spider-Verse paid homage to the first Raimi film by sticking the 60s theme in the end credits as well, followed by what might be the best post-credit scene in any movie ever.
No, not exactly.
Tom Holland's movies chose to integrate the theme into their orchestral score, a subtle choice that fits that series of films, but nobody seems to talk about how in Amazing Spider-Man 2, Peter has the theme song as his ringtone. He even whistles it to himself as he's stripping Alexia of his clothes after taking way too long to stop his vehicular manslaughter. I like to think that Peter came up with the theme song himself in this universe with a plan to market and merchandise his likeness. I mean, that New York rent, whew, it's expensive. In Spider-Verse, Kingpin's machine, used to access other dimensions, bears a shocking resemblance to the isotopic genome accelerator from the comics. It's okay if you don't know what I'm talking about, since none of the live-action Spider-Man movies had the spider that bit Peter be irradiated, taking the genetically engineered route instead. But the genome accelerator is what irradiated the spider that bit Peter in the comics, effectively being what creates Spider-Man. While the Peter of Miles' Earth attempts to shut down Kingpin's portal generator, he gets his head shoved into the particle stream by Green Goblin, causing him to see into the other worlds where our other spider people would come from, much like how the irradiated spider gave Peter his powers, setting his personal drama in motion. And irradiated Spider-Man ultimately brings the Spider-Men and women of the multiverse together. Even if he was a hired thief, we all knew that Uncle Aaron was a cool guy. He loved his nephew, had a sick pad, and even had great taste in TV. Alright, that last one's a little harder to spot considering the TV in his apartment's a bit blurry, but if you zoom in, you can see that he's watching an episode of Community, specifically Season 2's Anthropology 101, which featured Donald Glover getting out of bed in his Spider-Man pajamas, That episode aired in 2010, almost a whole year before Miles would make his comic debut in Ultimate Fallout issue 4. At the time, Donald Glover wanted to play Peter Parker in the then upcoming Amazing Spider-Man. Donald Glover has since managed to voice Miles Morales on the animated shows Ultimate Spider-Man and Marvel Spider-Man, and went on to play Miles' Uncle Aaron in Spider-Man Homecoming, although he has not been seen in the MCU since. With 20 Stan Lees, half a dozen Spider people, and an unexpected reference to Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, there's something new to find between the frames on every revisiting of this modern classic. A few can be found within Miles' contacts list, including B. Bendis and Sarah Pichelli, the writer-artist duo that created this beloved character. You can also find the names D. Slott and Jason Reynolds, each of whom penned Spidey stories featuring Miles. Dan Slott wrote the original Spider-Verse story this movie is based on, in addition to the plot of the underappreciated game, Spider-Man: Web of Shadows, and Jason Reynolds wrote the Miles Morales novel. If Miles were to call any of these people up, wouldn't that be like calling up God? If the adventures of the Fantastic Four are anything to go by, it's more likely than you think. One of the most relatable aspects of Spider-Man is how his struggles to pay his rent are just as epic as his struggles against his rogues gallery. Everyone remembers the bank scene from Spider-Man 2, not just because it leads into one of the film's best action scenes, but because of how Aunt May struggles to keep her house hits too close to home. Being too old to work a full-time job tends to complicate these things.
I'm giving piano lessons again.
And even if May is giving piano lessons again, it's not enough to convince the evil banker. Although, as we can see in Spider-Man 3, Peter is pretty adept at the piano, and we are pretty sure that did not come from the spider bite. It's quite possible that Aunt May was giving Peter those lessons. And if that series had continued, we may have seen May teaching homeless children to play it at feast. Modern iterations of The Bugle take the form of an Alex Jones-esque podcast as seen in J.K. Simmons' MCU interpretation of The Bugle. Given how prevalent that type of sensationalist media is today, that's the one that sticks out in most people's minds. But did you know that The Bugle once had a Tumblr? Do you remember Tumblr? Do you want to remember Tumblr? Probably not, but apart from how Sony made an official Daily Bugle Tumblr blog as part of the marketing for Amazing Spider-Man 2. This website is still viewable via archives, by the way, and also mentions a number of Spider-Man supporting characters that may have played a role in future movies, such as Ned Leeds the Hobgoblin, Anne Weying, Eddie Brock's ex-wife, and even Eddie Brock himself. Yeah, I'm content with where they are now. Some people claim that Peter Parker's greatest foe is the Green Goblin. Some say it's Venom. Some are bold enough to claim that it's J. Jonah Jameson himself. All of these people are wrong. Peter's greatest enemy is the one we all share: landlords. Mr. Ditkovich is as slimy as they come, not even letting Peter use the bathroom until he pays his rent. Come on. It's almost surprising that he's clearly modeled after Spider-Man co-creator Steve Ditko. How could they drag the name of the original illustrator of Spider-Man through the mud like that? Well, if you know your history, they didn't. Ditko was a Randian objectivist through and through. And while we do not have time to go in depth on that today, All you need to know in this context is that he was essentially pro-landlord and pro-establishment. Seriously, go read his last issue of Amazing Spider-Man and witness how relatable everyman Peter Parker admonishes a student protest rally. While Mr. Ditkovich of the movies is only remembered for not fixing that damn door, people forget that in Spider-Man 3, he actually had some helpful advice for Peter when he was going through his rough patch with Mary Jane. 9 movies and counting, Spider-Man will always have us coming back for more, regardless of which movie's your favorite. You can see that these movies had a lot of passion behind them, with each iteration being distinctively their own.